I watched the frantic scene unfold through the peephole of the cheap motel door. Sirens were wailing, and a team of 6 firefighters was struggling with a saw and a lot of industrial lubricant. That was the moment I realized the bottle of industrial superglue I'd swapped for my cheating husband's personal lubricant after discovering his affair had worked too well. He was stuck. She was stuck, and they were about to become a viral headline. My name is Jessica. I'm 41 years old, and until yesterday, I thought I had a solid, if slightly predictable marriage. I live in a beautiful split-level home in Phoenix, Arizona, the kind of sunshine-drenched suburb where life should be easy. I work as a successful freelance graphic designer, running my business mostly from my home office, which allowed me the flexibility to manage our 2 children, 10-year-old Finn and 13-year-old Chloe. My husband Mark is 43. He's a regional sales manager for a medical device company. Mark was the picture of an American husband, reliably handsome, good provider, and moderately charismatic. We had been together for 18 years. Our relationship, or what I thought it was built on mutual convenience, shared parenting, and a steady, comfortable routine. The other key players in this unfolding disaster are now famously inseparable: the other woman, whose name I learned was Ashley, a 27-year-old marketing coordinator from Mark's office, and the 2 teenagers, Finn and Chloe, who are currently blissfully unaware that their father is being meticulously separated from his new mistress by a team of first responders. I am the woman caught in the agonizing and now absurd position of being the wife who sought revenge so spectacularly that it escalated into a public emergency. I haven't always been the revenge-seeking type. My journey to this moment was paved with years of emotional neglect and slowly accumulating fear. My mother was chronically ill when I was growing up, and my father managed his stress by withdrawing. This taught me to value peace and stability above all else, often at the expense of my own needs. I learned to minimize conflict and to be the easy partner. In my marriage to Mark, this manifested as a deep, suffocating fear of confrontation. I noticed the emotional distance creeping in about 2 years ago. The shorter conversations, the less frequent touch, the way he stopped looking at me when he spoke. I felt myself shrinking, becoming almost invisible in my own home. My greatest fear wasn't that he would cheat. It was that if I confronted him, the stable, comfortable life I had so carefully constructed would shatter, leaving me utterly alone and responsible for 2 children. I remember standing in the bathroom 6 months ago, looking at my reflection. My face was tired, the lines around my eyes more pronounced than they should have been. My hands, usually busy designing, were hanging limp at my sides. I was paralyzed by the thought of being a single mother in her 40s. This paralyzing fear made me hyper-alert to Mark's movements, constantly searching for signs of assurance, which ironically only drove him further away. His eyes, when they occasionally met mine, were guarded, almost guilty, and I saw a flicker of the same avoidance my father used to exhibit. I didn't push. I just tightened my jaw, swallowed the lump in my throat, and continued performing my role as the perfect, non-demanding wife. I was a ticking time bomb of suppressed resentment, and his infidelity was the pin he pulled. Our life prior to my discovery and my ensuing descent into DIY revenge was a masterpiece of domestic normalcy. Mark and I had a routine that ran like clockwork. He would leave at 7:00 a.m. after a rushed breakfast. I'd manage the kids' school drop-offs and then settle into my home office for 8 hours of client work. The relationship between us was polite, quiet, and profoundly empty. We would exchange logistical texts. Did you pick up Chloe's cleats? Yes, ordered more groceries. There was an absolute absence of emotional friction, which I once mistook for peace. We shared a bed, but the sex had become mechanical and infrequent, often initiated by him, a quick functional event that felt more like checking a box than an act of intimacy. I remember one recent Sunday morning. We were sitting on our porch swing A seemingly idyllic scene. Mark was scrolling through his phone and I was reading a book. The air was warm, filled with the scent of blooming jasmine. He reached over without looking up from his screen and placed his hand on my knee, a familiar habitual gesture of possession, more than affection. It should have felt good, but it felt like the hand of a stranger. "Quiet morning," he murmured, his eyes still fixed on the screen. "It is nice," I replied, forcing a soft smile. The silence that followed wasn't easy. It was a vast, echoing chasm. Yet in that moment, I told myself, this is good. This is stable. We are fine. That stability was my sacred cow. It was the last moment of pure, false calm before I found the evidence, a credit card receipt for a local motel near Mark's office, dated Tuesday afternoons, and the distinct cloying scent of cheap floral perfume clinging to his coat. My sacred cow was slaughtered, and the peace I craved was replaced by a furious cold clarity that led me directly to the hardware store. The moment the perfect tranquil routine shattered was 3 days ago, not with a bang, but with the cold, hard reality of a printed receipt. I was reconciling our monthly expenses, something I usually did with a detached efficiency, when I spotted the charge, the sunlit Oasis Motel, $125. It wasn't the cost that stopped my heart. It was the location 4 blocks from Mark's regional office, a place no decent person stays unless they need an hourly room. My entire body went rigid, a sudden cold shock overriding all previous fear and denial. I stared at the receipt, my eyes tracing the date and time. It matched perfectly with the Tuesday late meeting Mark had claimed. My hands, which had been resting loosely on the desk, curled into tight, painful fists. The blood pounded in my ears, drowning out the ambient noise of the house. The feeling wasn't immediate heartbreak. It was a devastating realization that I had been a fool. All the suppressed anxiety, the ignored gut feelings, the polite silence, it wasn't peace. It was cowardice. And he had exploited it. My internal voice screamed. He looked me in the eye when he said he was working late. He kissed me goodbye when he knew he was going to her. I didn't confront him yet. I moved into an unnervingly calm, investigative mode. I had to know who she was. The next day, under the pretense of tidying his gym bag, I found the evidence I needed, a handwritten note and a youthful looping script on a pink sticky note tucked deep in his pocket. It read, "Can't wait for Tuesday, Marky. Same time, same place. Don't forget the special lube. XOA. A. Ashley." The special lube. It was the mention of the lubricant that triggered the ultimate shift from grief to cold, calculated vengeance. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a planned, ongoing deception that used our joint resources and mocked the intimacy we once shared. The object that symbolized their sordid secret, that special lube, would become the instrument of their downfall. I was suddenly infused with a terrifying, almost euphoric calm. My eyes narrowed, focusing inward. My lips tightened into a thin, predator-like smile that felt utterly foreign on my face. My hands, which had trembled with fear for years, were now steady. I marched straight to the garage, located my industrial-strength superglue, the kind Mark used for quick repairs, and began the meticulous swap. I drained the commercial personal lubricant bottle Mark kept in his bedside drawer and replaced it with the viscous, fast-acting adhesive. I stirred it with a disposable chopstick until the texture seemed right, then cleaned the bottle meticulously. As I placed the sealed, loaded bottle back exactly where I found it, I looked down at my hands. They didn't feel like the hands of a suburban mom. They felt like the hands of a saboteur. I wasn't shaking anymore. I was absolutely still, filled with a glacial certainty. My emotional reaction wasn't sadness. It was a powerful, chilling sense of justice building. He wanted his Tuesday rendezvous. He could have it. But I was ensuring it would be unforgettable. I was no longer the invisible wife. I was the architect of his public, sticky reckoning. The explosion didn't happen when I swapped the glue. It happened on Wednesday morning via a frantic anonymous phone call. I was in my home office trying to concentrate on a logo design project, but in reality, I was obsessively watching my phone waiting for news of my revenge. I had convinced myself Mark would just be stuck to the sheets or maybe suffer a minor chemical burn. Nothing dramatic. Then the phone rang. Caller ID blocked. I answered, my voice tight. "Hello." On the other end was a woman's voice, high-pitched and broken. "Is this Jessica? Are you Mark's wife? You need to get to the Sunlit Oasis Motel right now. The police and fire department are here. Mark!" The woman stopped, gasping for air. "They can't separate him and Ashley. They're glued together. It's absolutely horrific." My emotion peaked in that instant, but it wasn't the satisfaction I craved. It was an overwhelming, explosive mix of shock, abject panic, and a razor-thin edge of dark, hysterical humor. Glued together. Fire trucks. I shot out of my chair, slamming my hip against the corner of my desk. The physical pain was eclipsed by the sheer devastating wave of realization. I thought I was orchestrating a private prank, a quiet humiliation. But the involvement of firefighters and police had instantly upgraded my act from personal revenge to public catastrophe. I ran toward the closet, clutching my chest. My breathing became rapid, shallow, and fast. I went too far. I went monumentally, ridiculously too far. I rushed to my car, driving toward the motel, not out of a desire to help, but from a morbid, terrifying urge to witness the consequences of my own madness. As I rounded the corner, the sound of sirens was deafeningly clear. I parked several blocks away and walked the rest of the distance. Immediately, I saw the crowd, the flashing red lights, and a massive fire engine parked near the entrance. An ambulance was idling nearby. I crept closer, hiding behind a thick hedge, and gazed toward the ground floor room. Firefighters, looking baffled and annoyed, were moving equipment around using spray bottles and tools, clearly attempting a complex rescue operation. A police officer was trying to control the gawking crowd. Seeing the scene, a new emotion washed over me, stronger than anger or fear clarity. I was no longer the shrinking, frightened Jessica who had tried to keep the peace. I was the woman who had committed an extreme, decisive act, the ultimate burst of all my suppressed pain. I looked down at my hands. They were still shaking, but not from fear of Mark, but from the recognition of the destructive power I harbored. I had traded false stability for public chaos. The moment I saw that fire truck was the moment I understood I could never go back. I wasn't Mark's wife anymore. I was the creator of the Great Glue incident. I had to manage the fallout, but at least I was no longer the victim of the deceit. The feeling of wanting to laugh hysterically while simultaneously wanting to vomit from terror confirmed that my life had permanently shifted. The moment I saw the fire trucks and the bewildered faces of the firefighters, my paralyzing fear morphed into a chilling, laser-focused self-preservation instinct. I had to protect my children and myself from the fallout of this public sticky mess. I knew I had perhaps an hour before the situation escalated, and authorities began questioning me. Still concealed behind the hedge, I made the first crucial move, establishing an alibi of ignorance and concern. I called Mark's assistant, demanding in a voice trembling with well-rehearsed distress why Mark wasn't answering his phone, and if he had missed his major 10:00 a.m. meeting. The assistant, already flustered by Mark's absence, confirmed she had no idea where he was. Then I immediately called our family lawyer, David. "David," I said, pitching my voice to sound like the shocked, abandoned wife. "Mark has gone radio silent. He's missed a crucial meeting and his assistant is frantic. Something feels wrong. Could you please look into this for me? Maybe check local news or police reports. I'm terrified there's been an accident." This created a paper trail showing me as the proactive, concerned spouse, establishing my narrative before the true story broke. With that done, I sped home. The house felt like a staging ground for a crime scene, and I was the meticulous perpetrator. My priority was eliminating the evidence. I rushed to the master bathroom, where I began the most stressful task of the day, reversing the swap. I poured the legitimate personal lubricant I had reserved back into the original bottle, meticulously cleaning the container to remove any lingering chemical residue from the industrial superglue. I disposed of the small amount of remaining real lube down the sink with scalding water and disinfectant. The empty superglue container was the biggest hazard. I placed it inside 2 nested plastic bags, wrapped it in a towel, and drove 10 frantic paranoid miles out of our neighborhood. I pulled into a strip mall, parked discreetly, and dumped the evidence into a public dumpster far away from my home, ensuring no local sanitation worker would trace it back to my curb. I returned just as David called back, his voice thick with disbelief. "Jessica, you need to sit down. It wasn't an accident. Mark is at the Sunlit Oasis Motel with a woman from his office. They were found stuck together. The authorities had to call hazmat. I'm coming over immediately, and I mean it. Do not speak to anyone until I get there." I dropped onto the sofa, my hands clammy but steady. The defense was set. I was the shocked, unsuspecting wife who had just learned of her husband's sordid betrayal and subsequent public humiliation. Any questions about the unusual nature of the lubricant would be met with feigned ignorance, and the perfect answer: why would I know what special lube he brought to a motel room with his mistress? My protective wall was built brick by agonizing brick. Mark's physical release from Ashley took 12 agonizing hours and required specialized chemical solvents, turning them into a national laughingstock before the story even broke. He was then admitted to the hospital, less for physical damage and more for the complete psychological breakdown. The counterattack came not from Mark, but from Ashley's side. My lawyer David was in my living room, nervously adjusting his tie, when his phone rang. He listened for a moment, his face draining of color. He hung up and looked at me, his eyes wide with professional dread. "Jessica," he began, his voice low and serious. "Ashley's family has hired a litigation powerhouse, and they are not messing around. They have filed a police report and are preparing a civil suit. Their initial claim is extreme attempted felony assault and intentional infliction of emotional distress." "What?" I whispered, the blood draining from my face. "Felony assault. It was glue. They are arguing you knowingly substituted a caustic industrial chemical for a personal care product, causing physical harm and requiring emergency intervention," David explained, placing his hand over mine. "And here is the climax of the counterattacks. Ashley, through her lawyer, is claiming that Mark told her shortly before the incident that you had a severe untreated mental health issue, a history of paranoia, and that he feared you were becoming erratic." The room spun. This was calculated cruelty. Mark wasn't counterattacking with truth. He was counterattacking by weaponizing my emotional history and painting me as the insane, vengeful wife. He was using the very psychological vulnerability I had repressed for years, my fear of being seen as unstable, against me. David continued, "They are also alleging that the substance was highly similar to an industrial adhesive known to be used in your home graphic design business, and that you have expressed deep resentment toward Mark's finances. They are trying to make you look like a disgruntled, mentally unfit spouse who plotted a chemical attack to gain leverage in a divorce." My hands, which had been so steady during the cleanup, began to tremble uncontrollably. The panic was back, but this time it was existential. They weren't just attacking my actions, they were attacking my sanity and my character. The threat was real, not just jail time, but potentially losing custody of my children if I was declared mentally unfit. I looked at David, my voice cracking with icy resolve. "They are lying. Mark invented that narrative to justify his affair. But the glue, David, I need to know if they trace the adhesive. Will they link it back to the house?" David nodded slowly. It's possible. Industrial glue is traceable. This is now a criminal matter as well as a civil one. You need to tell me everything, Jessica, right now. The silence hung heavy in the room. I was trapped between the immediate terrifying threat of criminal charges and the psychological warfare Mark was waging against me. My public act of revenge had succeeded wildly. But the unexpected calculated counterattack had landed a devastating blow on my most vulnerable spot, my reputation and my stability as a mother. I was forced to drop the facade of the innocent wife and fully embrace my role as the defensive perpetrator. The game was no longer about revenge. It was about survival. David listened intently as I confessed everything the moment I found the receipt, the pink note, the superglue swap, and the subsequent cover-up. He didn't judge. He simply absorbed the data, his professional calm returning. "Okay, Jessica," David said, nodding slowly. "They're playing the crazy wife card and the chemical assault card. We need an airtight defense that targets both." Our defense wasn't to deny the glue. It was to justify it not legally, but emotionally and contextually, and then expose Mark's true motive. David's strategy was brilliant. We would admit to the act, but frame it as an immediate, non-premeditated crime of passion spurred by overwhelming emotional distress and a history of manipulation, which would mitigate the felony assault charge. Then we would pivot and use Mark's own crazy wife lie to destroy his entire case. "Mark claimed you have a history of paranoia and erratic behavior, right?" David asked. "Yes. That's his defense for leaving me, that I'm unstable." "Perfect," David said, a dangerous glint in his eye. "We will subpoena all of Mark's electronic communications with Ashley and his family over the last 6 months. They want to talk about your sanity. We talk about his motive for inventing that narrative." The moment of the final strike came during the preliminary hearing, where Ashley's lawyer attempted to secure an emergency restraining order and access to our finances, citing my alleged volatility. Ashley's lawyer painted a vivid, chilling picture of a meticulously planned chemical attack by an unstable woman. When it was David's turn, he didn't even address the glue. He focused solely on the psychological warfare. "Your Honor," David began, "the defense does not dispute that Ms. Hayes was emotionally distressed. Her marriage had been brutally violated. However, the prosecution's central claim that my client has a history of mental instability is not only false, but was fabricated by Mr. Hayes himself to coerce my client." David then presented Exhibit A, a series of text messages and emails retrieved via subpoena from Mark's work account sent to Ashley over the past year. The texts were damning. In one message, Mark complained to Ashley, "I can't just leave Jess. She controls all the money and she's starting to lose it. She gets really paranoid when I talk about divorce. I need to keep her calm until I can move the assets." Another message read, "Just tell your boss I need more time to sell the condo. Jess is completely unstable, and I need to make sure she doesn't do anything crazy if I file the papers. I'm building a paper trail of her erratic behavior." The room went silent. Mark, who was sitting at the defense table next to Ashley's lawyer, turned visibly pale, realizing his own narrative was his undoing. The reveal. Mark wasn't reporting my genuine mental health issues. He was systematically manufacturing evidence of my instability to justify his betrayal, secure a more favorable divorce settlement, and gain control of the assets before filing. He was trying to financially and psychologically ruin me. My act of gluing him was reckless. But Mark's long-term calculated campaign of psychological abuse, lying to his mistress, his family, and his lawyers about my sanity was far more malicious. The glue was impulsive passion. His actions were cold, calculated financial and emotional battery. The judge, clearly appalled by Mark's calculated deceit, immediately denied the restraining order and signaled clear skepticism about the felony assault. charges stating that Mark's communications suggested a pattern of highly unethical behavior and potential marital coercion. My final strike wasn't the glue. It was the unmasking of Mark as the true manipulator. I looked at Mark across the courtroom. His eyes were no longer triumphant. They were filled with the raw, terrifying fear of a man whose carefully constructed lie had been utterly demolished. I had finally turned his own weapon against him. The legal battle following the preliminary hearing was swift and decisively in my favor. Mark's deliberate attempt to create a paper trail of my instability completely backfired. The judge viewed his actions as a severe breach of trust and a calculated attempt at coercion. The felony assault charge against me was dropped entirely reframed as an impulsive one-time incident caused by extreme marital distress. The subsequent divorce was a formality dictated almost entirely by the revelation of Mark's deceit. Because he had been actively trying to manipulate assets under false pretenses, claiming I was unstable to control the money, his financial bargaining power evaporated. I retained the houseful custody of Finn and Chloe and a substantial fair settlement that secured our future. Mark and Ashley became a footnote. Their careers suffered irreparable damage, and their sticky notoriety followed them everywhere. The ultimate victory, however, wasn't the settlement. It was the release. I remember the day the final papers were signed. I drove home not to the heavy, silent house of my marriage, but to a house that felt light and breathable for the first time in years. I walked into the master bathroom, looked at the empty space where the special lube used to sit, and burst out laughing. It wasn't hysterical laughter. It was a full, unrestrained sound of pure cathartic freedom. The greatest liberation was the shattering of my old identity, the easy wife who valued stability over sanity. The woman who swapped the glue was reckless, yes, but she was also someone who finally refused to be a victim. My fear of confrontation had paralyzed me. My act of revenge, however extreme, had violently severed that paralysis. I sat my children down a few weeks later. I didn't tell them about the glue or the motel, but I told them the truth about their father. He had made some very bad choices, and we were safer and happier without him. They saw the strength and genuine peace in my eyes, and they accepted it. My relationship with my children flourished. I was no longer an anxious, distracted presence. I was present, resilient, and honest about my own capacity for flawed humanity. I realized that the biggest moral of my story wasn't about the glue itself. It was about the dangerous power of suppressed emotion. My rage, my sadness, and my fear, when ignored, had morphed into a destructive force. But when finally acknowledged, that same force became my fierce protective armor. I look at myself now, 42 divorced, and the undisputed architect of the Great Glue Incident. I'm not ashamed. I am a survivor who learned that sometimes you have to create a spectacular mess to finally clear out the rot. The chaos Mark created was public, but the narrative I presented to Finn 10 and Chloe 13 had to be rock solid and age appropriate. They saw the news reports, of course, the headlines were everywhere, using euphemisms like domestic dispute involving unusual adhesives. Chloe, being a teenager, was the first to ask, her eyes wide with a mix of horror and morbid curiosity. "Mom?" she asked one evening, putting down her phone. "Is Dad the guy they're calling Sticky Mark on TikTok?" This was the hardest moment of the entire ordeal. I looked at her, then at Finn, who was coloring nearby, occasionally glancing up. I chose selective truth over a compounding lie. "Yes, honey," I said, my voice steady. "Your father and a woman from his office were involved in a terrible, embarrassing incident. Your dad made choices that were wrong, choices that hurt our family, and those choices had consequences, public ones. But I want you both to know two things. First, the details are grown-up problems, and they have nothing to do with how much he loves you. Second, we are safe. I am stable, and we are going to be okay." I let them process their feelings without judgment. I didn't blame Mark, but I didn't defend his actions either. I kept therapy sessions for them separate from my own, ensuring they had a safe, neutral space to deal with the trauma of public exposure and parental failure. The biggest consequence for them was the loss of the illusion of normalcy. But that loss was replaced by something stronger: trust in me. They saw me face a disaster, handle the legal sharks, and rebuild their lives without crumbling. I realized the best defense for my children wasn't silence. It was modeling stability in the face of chaos. The nickname stuck ironically. I didn't choose it. The internet did. I was the glue girl, or Sticky Mark's ex. For a while, the infamy was mortifying. I couldn't go to the grocery store without feeling eyes on me, and I developed an acute sensitivity to the smell of disinfectant. However, the glue girl story had a weird empowering effect on my professional life. My graphic design business, which had been purely local, suddenly went viral. People wanted to hire the woman who was capable of such cold, calculated action. They figured she'd be meticulous with deadlines. My workload quadrupled. Suddenly, my business became less about pretty logos and more about storytelling and resilience. More importantly, the trauma of the past became my new armor. I started a private anonymous blog where I talked about the suffocating fear of confrontation, the anxiety of financial dependence, and the moment I broke. The response was overwhelming. Women wrote to me from all over the country, thanking me for showing that a desperate act could lead to unexpected liberation. They didn't see a criminal. They saw a woman who finally fought back. I learned to lean into the absurdity. When a client once nervously asked if I used industrial adhesives in my craft projects, I just smiled, looked them dead in the eye, and said only when deadlines are missed. The fear was gone. The old timid Jessica was annihilated by the public spectacle, leaving behind a woman who was brutally honest, self-aware, and utterly fearless of what others thought of her. The shame was replaced by a strange, hard-earned confidence. The glue girl was messy, but she was free. If there is one final lesson I can impart from the chaos of my life, it's this: your biggest fear is usually your greatest weapon. My deepest fear was being seen as the unstable, crazy woman. Mark knew this, and he tried to use it to destroy me financially and psychologically, weaponizing my own past anxieties. But my willingness to commit the ultimate crazy act, swapping the glue, was what finally forced me to confront that label and disarm it. I proved to myself and the court that Mark was the manipulator, not me. The real takeaway: 1. Don't fear the divorce. The collapse of my marriage was the price of my freedom. The stability you cling to might just be the quiet room where your unhappiness is slowly suffocating. It is far better to embrace the chaos of unnecessary change than to live under the rigid control of fear. 2. Own your narrative. The world will always give you a label: glue girl, crazy ex, victim. The only thing that matters is the label you give yourself. I chose survivor and architect of my own peace. Own your history, flaws and all. 3. Financial literacy is self-defense. Mark's downfall was his arrogance in thinking I was too ignorant to handle money. Never let a partner make you feel incompetent in your own financial life. Every person needs to know the bank codes, the policy details, and the name of the lawyer. It's not about distrust. It's about dignity and self-preservation. I am Jessica, and I survived the superglue disaster. I am running a successful business, raising 2 resilient kids, and I haven't looked back. My life is still a bit sticky sometimes, but it's entirely mine. So there it is. The story of how I saved my life by swapping my cheating husband's lube for industrial superglue. If you are watching this, and you are shrinking yourself for the sake of peace, or ignoring that deep, cold anxiety in your gut, I want you to stop. Don't let your suppressed anger turn into an explosive device. Find a healthy outlet. Talk to a therapist. Talk to a lawyer. Get financially independent. You deserve a life that is truly peaceful, not just politely silent. Tell me in the comments, what small act of defiance have you taken to reclaim your power? It doesn't have to involve industrial adhesives. If you found this wild story cathartic, please hit the like button and subscribe. Next week, I'm sharing the 5 biggest financial mistakes I made in my marriage that almost cost me everything. You don't want to miss that? Thank you for listening to my story. Stay strong and stay safe.